You don't have to be quite that enthusiastic. Thank you, Dave. No, it's so good to see everybody out here on a nice, wonderful day. I have the pleasure of being the moderator for today's program. And the program is called What's Breaking My Heart? And this is part one of a two-part series. Second part is going to be next Saturday. This is a community conversation about heart disease, prevention, early detection, genetic counseling, and survivorship. It is hosted by Antioch Missionary Baptist Church in partnership with Heal Collaborative and AstraZeneca. We'll begin with welcoming and prayer by Pastor Dr. Quentin Hammonds, Senior Pastor.
Good morning, everyone. It's good to be alive. Amen. It's good to be alive. Let me see. Yeah, I'm here. It's good to be alive and good to see all of you who are here this morning. Welcome to Antioch. Yeah, the disciples were first called Christians at Antioch. So we want to invite you into our home. Our home is your home today. And you can do everything in here you want to do that's godly. If it ain't godly, you're going to have to go over there to the other church. But we welcome Heal Collaborative. We've been partners with them now for some time because I take no pleasure in preaching funerals. So I want my folk to live as long as they can. In the words of late Dr. B.B. Straughter, who lived to be 96 years old, he told me one day, he said, baby, I'm going to live long as I can and die when I can't help it. And I've adopted that same philosophy because for me to live is Christ. For me to die is gain. So welcome this morning, and you're going to be blessed by this seminar. Every head bowed. God, we thank you for this day. We thank you, Lord, for being in our right minds and having a reasonable portion of health and strength. God, we thank you for directing our steps to this place. And now, Lord, we pray that you would sanction our efforts here today. Bless every speaker, bless Heal Collaborative, and Lord, help us to help ourselves. Oh God, we pray that you would give us not only a clean spiritual heart, but a healthy physical heart. Lord, we ask these blessings in the name of Jesus. Amen. All right, I'll give it back to our moderator.
I must admit, Dr. Hammonds, you set a very high standard. In all the other programs and places we go, we have to compare it to what you do here at Antioch. This is such a wonderful, it's always the place to be. So thank you for again having us. I'd like to bring up for greetings. First, I'd like to bring up Mr. Howard Mosby. He is a graduate of Georgia Southern University. He's a former Georgia State legislator, and currently he is the corporate treasurer for the Heal Collaborative. Mr. Mosby.
You always have to say good morning to the bishop of the house. Amen? Okay, I just make sure I was in the right place now. Dr. Tuxton said I went to Georgia Southern University. That is incorrect. Let me get that straight. It's Georgia State University. That's why we come to these programs, ladies and gentlemen, to get correct information. That's why we're here today. Good morning. I am Howard Mosby. I'm one of the principals at Hill Collaborative. We are glad to be here again. Pastor Hammonds has really opened this church up, his arms wide, embracing our organization. We are just happy to lock arms with Antioch to bring this kind of information to the community. This is an important issue for our community. So many of us are dying of heart disease. This is a specific issue, but a lot of us don't know why. Pastor Hammonds will funeralize people, and he didn't even know they were sick. We don't tell the story of why Miss So-and-so died, or cousin so-and-so died. They died of cancer. What kind of cancer? We need to know. And this is not about you, it's about your grandchildren. How do you tell them what's happening to you could affect them? And so programs like this is desperately needed in our community, and we come to the church first because I don't care what nobody say. The church is still the most trusted voice in the black community. Amen? I just need to know that, because otherwise, we pack our stuff up and leave. But we know right now, and I was brought up in the church, this is it. And so we're bringing these programs to you. I'd like to say thank you. I'd like to say thank you to AstraZeneca, who actually helped fund this program, and they've been an awesome partner with our organization from the beginning of us starting. They were actually one of the premier organizations that helped us launch out doing this kind of work, and we're just proud to stand with them as well. So with that, I don't know what I need to do next, but turn it back over to you. It was Georgia State University. Thank you all.
Thank you very much for pointing out my error. Let me publicly apologize to Georgia Southern for trying to say that he was actually part of them. So if any of you attended Georgia Southern, please accept my apologies. First, let's hear a few words from Mr. Jason Long. He's Commercial Alignment Leader for Cardiovascular, Renal, and Metabolic Diseases. He's been with AstraZeneca for 6 years now. So please, Jason, come on up.
Good morning, everybody. So my name is Jason Long from AstraZeneca. I am a Commercial Alignment Leader. It's just a big title, but all it means is I look at a lot of data and I do a lot of PowerPoint presentations. But I am excited to not only represent AstraZeneca, but Birmingham is my home. It's where I live. It is where I went to college at Samford University, where I was a biology pre-med major. It is where I played football at Samford, and Birmingham is also where I joined that great fraternity of Kappa Alpha Psi. Birmingham is where I raised my 2 boys who are now in college and high school. Birmingham is where I attend church. Birmingham is also where I have great and fond memories. So I'm excited to not only represent AstraZeneca, but to live in this great city of Birmingham, Alabama. But it's not about just me being from Birmingham, it also is about where I come from. I'm a country man from Tupelo, Mississippi. And it all began with my grandmother, my mom's mother. She and her husband, my grandparents, had 18 children. My grandmother served as a midwife, because back then we couldn't always go to the hospital. So my grandmother, having 18 children, would help bring children into this life. And her favorite saying was, I've learned in life that what you give to others is what provides the most value to your life. And so from my grandparents, they had my mom, and she and my dad, they had 8 children, where I'm one of 8. And not only do my parents have 8 children, but they are both preachers. So I'm a double preacher's kid. I'm a PK. Okay? And not only did my parents, were they preachers, but my dad was also in law enforcement. So my dad said, you either going to jail or going to hell. So you better act right. Okay? And so from there, my dad served in law enforcement, giving back to the community, and my mother is the chief professional officer for Boys and Girls Club, where they provide after school and summer program for students and for kids. So that way they have a place to go so that parents know where their child is and can be safe. And then I live in Birmingham and I serve at AstraZeneca, where I've been in healthcare, I've been in banking, I've been in the operating room providing surgeons with opportunity to provide minimally invasive surgery to patients. But I gotta say, nothing gives me more pleasure than to partner with these great people here to do what you're doing. Dr. Hammonds, you said, I want my people to live. In order to live, you gotta have knowledge. Because as they're saying, when you know better, you do better. And one of my sayings that my parents would always say is, knowledge is like money. To be of value, it must be circulated. And in circulating, it can increase in quantity and in value. Today and next week, you're going to be getting information, and we hope that it does not stay here. We want it to circulate. So all of you are getting information of value. Take it, circulate it to your homes, to your communities, to your loved ones. So thank you so much on behalf of AstraZeneca, to Hill Collaboration, and to Antioch. I can already tell you all in a great place. And I say they put together a great program for you today and next weekend, and I know you will find a lot of value in it. So ask a lot of questions, take a lot of notes, and on behalf of my welcome, I do say thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Long. I appreciate that. So the question comes down to, well, number one, everyone got these packets, and within your packet, you'll notice there's a sheet with the survey. On one side is the pre-survey, and the back end there's a post-survey. So before we get started with things, as we're getting started, I want you to fill out the pre-survey. It's very important for us to make sure we're meeting our targets here, make sure we're addressing the needs that everyone has. So if you'll fill that pre-survey out and wait till the end of the program and fill out the post-survey, we'll have you turn it in to us before you leave. And I'll remind everybody about that. So the question comes down, why are we here? What is the big thing? I think Mr. Long already set it up very nicely about what we're trying to do. But I remember way back when I was in medical school a long time ago, when Socrates and Asclepius were roaming the world. That's how long ago it was when I was in school. But I had a surgeon professor who told us, he said, there are two diagnoses you never make. The one you don't know about and the one you don't think about. And what our goal here today is the number one. You will know about amyloid heart disease. And so when you go see somebody, you're going to make sure that they are thinking about this, not only for the physician, but also for the patient. So you got to remember, what about heart disease? Heart disease is the #1 cause of death in the United States. #1. And when you compare heart disease to cancer and death by accidents, which are the numbers 2 and 3, heart disease is still more common than the numbers 2 and 3 causes of the death. So we know there's a lot that's going on that we can do as far as treatment and or prevention. Today, we're going to hear first about different causes of, yes, sir. I'm sorry. Okay. We'll first hear a little bit about the cause of death in the how heart disease, causes death in the United States, and how it causes dysfunction, and how some of the presentation. Then we're going to go on to learn about what was, at least when I came along, the previously less well-known cause of cardiac dysfunction, that being amyloid heart disease, and where these abnormal proteins called amyloid accumulate in the heart muscle. Finally, we'll hear about the need for genetic testing, since while cardiac amyloid disease can develop on its own, in many of us, it is something that is inherited, otherwise passed down through generations. At the end, we will have a question and answer session. So as you're listening to things that are being said today, please make notes to yourself. You have a little paper that's there. Make notes, and at the end of the presentations, formal presentations, we'll have a question and answer when we want to make sure that we have a chance to answer all the questions that you have. In a moment, we're going to move on to what I think is the most important part of our program, which is the fireside chat. But first, we have a special guest here with us. Senator, why don't you please come forth and give us a few words.
Well, I'm in the church, so I have to say good morning, church. It is always a pleasure to be in the house of God, especially in this one. I am on limited voice. I'm State Senator Marika Coleman, and I got a message about coming over here and giving greetings. I did not even pay attention, and someone in Washington that actually invited me didn't pay attention that there are actually two Colemans in the legislature. So there's Linda Coleman Madison, who actually represents Senate District 20, which we're in right now. And I am Marika Coleman, and I represent Senate District 19. But as I was getting closer to the church, although I don't represent this area, this is home for me. This is home. Reverend Hammonds has been with me in my life with some of the triumphs of my life, but also some of the saddest moments of my life in this church. In this church, my mother, for you all that are members, is Paulette Gray, who is now Paulette Williams. My aunt, Dorothy Tannehill, all the Tannehills. So all the Tannehills, all the Grays are my family. So in this church, I've actually sang over here at my one of my aunt's funerals, right here in this church, and one of my uncle's funerals right here in this church. And when I was a little girl, I would walk over here with my cousins, because my grandmother's home is right over there on Nelson Avenue. So Bessie Gray, we would walk over here to the old church, because I'm a military brat, but I would come here and visit in the summers. And we would go to the old church, to none other than Vacation Bible School, training up a child. And so I just want to thank whoever made the mistake. And maybe it wasn't a mistake, because it was in God's plan for me to be here today. So thank you all for the opportunity to serve in the Alabama Senate, because I know some of you all are coming from around the way. But in the political climate we're in, and I know y'all are not political, but I am, we definitely need to make sure that we take care of ourselves. We may not get all of the messages from Washington, D.C. that we used to get. So I'm thankful for AstraZeneca and the sponsors today, for the organization, for coming here to make sure that we are all healthy, so we can not only survive, we can thrive in 2025. So thank you again for this opportunity, and so glad that I had the chance to come over here today. Thank you, and I love you, Pastor.
Dr. Hammond, the reach of the view is just great. How do you reach out and get all these people? Didn't anyone supposed to be here, and yet here she shows up and has her connection. That's marvelous. It's the name. Yes, sir, I got you covered. I'm going to use that name later on. Let me see if I can get a cup of coffee on that one, man. To get us started, though, I think what's important, you'll hear a lot of times from professionals, physicians, industry. We'll talk about things, but it really doesn't carry quite the gravitas when we hear it from patients. They seem to have far more intimate experience, and we all, as patients, tend to pay attention to other people who've gone through the trials and tribulations that we are. We tend to pay a little bit better. So we're going to do what's called the fireside chat. This is a patient and caregiver journey. Our moderator is going to be Ms. Jocelyn Ashford. She's head of U.S. Corporate Affairs, Cardiovascular, Metabolic, and Renal Diseases with AstraZeneca. Ms. Ashford, if you'll come on up as the moderator. Our panel is going to include Mr. Otis Leonard, a cardiac amyloid patient, and his wife, Charlene Leonard. Y'all can come on up. Winnie Childs, who's also a patient. Mr. Robert Robinson, also a patient, and his wife, Ms. Deborah Robinson.
So I'm Jocelyn. You're not going to hear much from me because you're not here to hear from me. You're here to hear from this beautiful group of individuals here on the stage. And I would say this is the most important part of today. It's an opportunity to learn from people who've come before us and who are living with or living close to amyloidosis. So without further ado, I'm actually just going to have everyone introduce themselves across the stage. We're going to start with you. You just don't want to talk. We're going to start with you. And we're just going to ask everyone to just share your name if you're a caregiver or a loved one.
Thank you, Joycelyn. My name is Charlene Leonard, and I'm a caregiver of my husband. And we're from Kellerton, Alabama, down the road from Birmingham.
My name is Otis Leonard, and I do have amyloid. And just like my wife said, we live in Kellerton, Alabama. And I think it's a great opportunity for us to be here today to share our story. And thank you all for inviting us.
My name is Winnie Childs. I too have amyloid, and this is actually my brother who is responsible for me finding out all the years that I wondered what was wrong with my heart. Because of what happened to him, it gave me the opportunity to find out what was breaking my heart.
My name is Louis Childs, and I'm the caregiver of my wife, Winnie Childs.
My name is Deborah Robinson, and this is my husband, Robert Robinson Jr., but I'm the caregiver. And we are from Prattville, Alabama, in Autauga County, so we'll look far down the road of just a little piece.
Okay, my name is Robert L. Robinson Jr., and I have the amyloid, and I've been on a patient for a few years, but I thank you all for inviting us here to be on this panel today so we can kind of spread the news about what's going on with this disease, because it ain't no joke.
And we're going to get into that now. We're actually going to start with you, Miss Winnie. Tell us about your amyloidosis story.
Well, when I was younger and finished high school and started working, I noticed that there was something that was really off with my heart. It didn't beat at a steady rhythm. It would get fast and slow. It would beat hard, and then it feel like it would rarely be beating. So I went from cardiologist, one doctor, to the next doctor, and to the next doctor, and nobody could find anything that was wrong. It got to a point where I had visited so many doctors trying to find out till I finally gave up. I finally gave up on it and took it as being normal. But I knew in my heart of hearts it was not normal, because there was times when I could barely feel it beating, like it was smothering, and then there were other times when it would just beat so hard it actually take my breath away. And I would lay down sometime at night, and I specifically could not lay on my left side, because when I laid on my left side, it felt like my heart just slowed down so slow until I didn't even know if it was beating at all or not. So, and I put up with this for years, because as of last month, I am 76 years old. And I put up with it all those years. And the only thing that I could find was that they had diagnosed me with tachycardia. And I had made several trips to the ER because of that. And I would talk with my other siblings, because in our family there were 9 of us. And I noticed that my sister Mary, my sister Doris, and my brother James, and we would all get together and talk, and we were all taking the same medicine. And I'm going like, what's wrong with a heart that everybody in the family's got the same thing? And we were all taking If it wasn't a Tylenol, it was metotrophanol. If it wasn't that, it was something else. But it all was designed to do the same thing. Why is it that my sisters and brothers and we all have the same thing? But there was no doctor that I could find that could give me an answer to that until Otis got really, really sick and had to seek emergency care. So, and that's what started my journey of amyloid.
Miss Winnie. So, Mr. Otis, you had an emergent event. Tell us about that day.
Yes, my event, it happened on September 29th, 2023. And that particular morning, I had gone to the farm to take care of the cows and fed the cattle, and I came back home. I was going to study my Sunday school lesson because it was going to be my Sunday to teach Sunday school. And this was on a Friday, and we had a funeral at the church, and I knew Saturday was going to be an all-day event, and we was going to be at the church pretty much all day on Saturday. So I was going to use Friday as my preparation time for Sunday school. So I got back home, I ate a little small breakfast, I got back home, and I started studying, I guess maybe around 10:30, 11 o'clock. Charlene was gone, the house was quiet, and I had the house to myself, and I was sitting at my desk and studying. And, maybe for, maybe a couple hours, maybe 2.5 hours, I sat there and I studied, and I was getting ready to go in the kitchen to get me a drink or a snack or something, but anyway, I remember standing up. And when I stood up, I got extremely dizzy. So I sat back down. I'm saying to myself, my blood pressure has dropped. And, and I sat there for a few moments, and hopefully, I said it'll come back up. So maybe I sat there maybe 5 minutes, and I stood up again, and it just didn't come back up. And so, I went and checked my blood pressure. My blood pressure was like 90/60 something. And, so like, I knew that I've had problems maybe with my blood pressure dropping before. And if I just gave it a little time, it gradually would come back up. So, but this particular time, it just never really came up. So I called Charlene and I told her, I said, look, I said, bring me something to eat while you're out. I said, get me some lunch. And so she brought lunch.
I have a
Yes.
follow-up question. Did
Yes.
she know how you were feeling?
I didn't tell her at the
Of
time.
course not.
But anyway, she brought lunch. Yeah, she brought us out. And then, I was telling her what was going on after I was eating. I said, after I eat this, I felt like I'd be okay. And so, I ate lunch, and, maybe about an hour later, I just wasn't getting any better. My blood pressure was not coming up. And so, we have a nurse friend of ours, and so she got our daughter to call her, and so she started asking me questions. Maybe thought maybe my blood sugar had dropped because I hadn't eaten like I should, and and after being on the phone with her, she asked me several questions, and the things that she would ask me, I guess it was close to maybe what was going on, but I knew that wasn't not hitting home. But anyway, they convinced me to go to the emergency room. So this was like, getting on about 4:30 in the afternoon. So.
What time was that? What time was that?
I don't know what time it was, but it was about 4:30 when they was convincing me to go to the emergency room. But anyway, and I know how we are. I know how men are. So we trying to tough it out, and I was trying to tough it out, but I saw this wasn't going away. And so, they carried me to the emergency room. And, when I got there, they started doing blood work. And after, maybe being there an hour and a half, maybe, the emergency room doctor came back and he told me, he said, Mr. Leonard, tell me what happened to you again. So I told him what happened. And he said that my enzyme levels was extremely high and that it looks like I've had a heart attack. And I'm like, Doc, I'm not having a heart attack. He said, Mr. Leonard, you're having a heart attack. I said, I'm not having a heart attack. I said, because I don't have what you would say, what I have known to be the heart attack symptom. I'm not having chest pain. My arm is not hurting. I'm not in a sweat. My blood pressure just won't come back up. He said, Mr. Leonard, trust me, you're having a heart attack. I said, well, Doc, if you say so. But anyway, and he said, where do you want to go? This was at Russell Medical Center in Alexander City, the closest one near us. He said, do you want to go to Lee County down to Opelika? I said, no, I don't want to go to Opelika. He said, what about Grandview in Birmingham? I said, no, I don't want to go to Grandview. And I told him, I said, look, I want to go to UAB. He said, well, let us make some phone calls. So they made some phone calls. Don't have any beds at UAB. I'm like, well, I don't want to go to Opelika, and I definitely don't want to go. I want to go to UAB because my cardiologist that I used some years ago was at UAB, and that's where I wanted to go. And so he said, well, we'll keep trying. So they kept trying, and this rocks along to about 2 o'clock in the morning on Saturday morning. So, but at the same time, I'm starting to feel better. My blood pressure, is coming back up. And, I'm laying there on the bed and I'm thinking, well, it can't be too much wrong with me because, I'm feeling so much better. I'm not feeling like I'm having a heart attack. So they finally got a bed at UAB roughly around 2 a.m. that morning. And so they carried me by ambulance to UAB. And so when I got to UAB roughly around 3:30 that morning, they started running their tests, started doing, their exam. And then that morning, I guess roughly 7:30, 8 o'clock, I remember it was a team. One of the doctors was Dr. Booker. The other was Jason. I can't remember his last name, and maybe it was another doctor. But anyway, they told me, Mr. Leonard, tell me what happened to you again. So I explained to them what happened. And I remember Dr. Booker telling me, he said, we don't, from the preliminary exam that we were giving you the blood test, he said, don't look like you're having a heart attack. He said, matter of fact, your enzyme numbers have come down. And he says, normally if you're having a heart attack, your enzyme is going to stay up and they're just going to continue to kind of climb. And so he told me, he said that we're going to be looking at some other things. He said, but right now we just don't see you having a heart attack. I said, okay. And so maybe about midday that Saturday came back in there and they was telling me about what they think they saw. And he said that it looks like you have a condition called amyloid. I'm like, amyloid? He said amyloidosis. I'm like, what is that? And he was telling me, explaining to me, this is a protein that should stay in your liver that gets into your bloodstream, and when it folds, it gets sticky, and it sticks to your organs. And so he said, well, we're not sure. He said, but that's what it looks like. So he said, we're going to do some other exams. And so they did some other tests. And so later on that afternoon, that Saturday afternoon, and they came back and they told me, said, Mr. Leonard, from all of the exams, all of the tests that we've done so forth, it looks like you do have this condition called amyloidosis. And so I remember that Dr. Jason told me, he said, Mr. Leonard, he said it was nothing but the grace of God. That you did not go to Opelika, that you did not go to Grandview. It was the grace of God that you came to Birmingham at UAB, because he said if you had gone to any of those other facilities, they would have just looked at you and said that you have a heart condition, not done the proper exam, not done the exams to determine what is really going on with you. He says, not a knock on them. He said, but they just don't have the expertise. They just didn't have the knowledge. And he said it was nothing but the grace of God, because they would have just said that you got a heart condition, gave you medication, sent you back home. Your condition would have just got progressively worse. So nothing but the grace of God. So, and I'm thankful for that.
And see, that's what had happened to me all the other years. Nobody was ever able to diagnose it because I had episodes of low blood sugar. One day at work, I felt like I almost needed to crawl out of the building to get to my car because my blood pressure had dropped so low, and I didn't know what it was. It had dropped to like 84/54. And I felt like I could barely breathe. And I just didn't have the energy or the strength to keep on going. So I felt like I'm gonna have to get my husband to lift me up and put me in the car, because that's just how bad I felt.
So just want you to keep track of this. So you're hearing about some of these symptoms, you're hearing about misdiagnoses. I actually want, and I'm also hearing, the other thing you're hearing about is advocating. So Mr. Otis just mentioned that maybe some of these other hospitals may not have caught this condition. Well, yes, those doctors may not have known, but here we are today learning about some of these signs and symptoms so that maybe one day, if this happens to you, you can ask questions of the doctor so that you know the steps that you think the doctor may want to take and have that conversation. But I want to hear from Mr. Robinson. You too are living with amyloidosis. How does your story compare to the story you've heard from Miss Winnie and Mr. Otis? Is it different? Tell us about your experience.
Well, in somewhat different, but in somewhat same thing. My journey started, I didn't know I had this stuff. So mine started like 1997. And they told me that I had congestive heart failure. Okay, from 97 to 2000 and I can't remember, but anyway, it was like 10 or 15 years. They treated me for congestive heart failure. Okay, then they finally found out that I had symptoms of just like you would have heart symptoms. Your feet swell, your legs swelling, ankles, and I was swelling everywhere that I could swell. Eyelids and your nerves. It attacks your nervous system too now. It mess with anything that nerves control. It mess with it. So it's had me in that. I thought I was having effect from heart failure. And then when I was swelling so bad, my primary care doctor said, "Well, I don't know what this is." Said, "I'm gonna call your heart specialist." But they know each other and everything. So my heart specialist, Dr. Beverly, started by Howley at Jackson Hospital in Montgomery. So they called each other and they got together and they couldn't ever figure out whatever. So they said, "We're gonna call UAB." So she called some doctors up here. And they had me to come up here, and when I got up here, the doctor looked at me and said, "Well, you done build up a lot of fluid." And I was like tight all around here, but I never was like, she said, like when she was young, I had no symptoms. I was a football player on the wrestling team and all this stuff. And when you wrestling, you ain't got no hip, so you ain't no need of getting tired, cause it just ain't gonna work. But anyway, they stayed a week up here in the hospital drawing fluid off me, like 20 pounds or something. And when they got all that off me, then they sent me home, and they told me what I had when I was up there. And I had never heard of it. I already had cardiovascular heart disease. And then the amyloidosis came in. Then they was arguing about how to treat me, because the same medicine they treat amyloidosis with, they treat cardiovascular amyloid with. So I said, well, But I look at it like he looked at it. It was nothing but God. They told me they didn't say it in all these words, but you supposed to be dead. Basically what they said, I ain't never felt like I was going nowhere. I mean, I feel my wife would tell you but I just couldn't do the stuff that I used to do. Took away my energy. And I come home from work, go in the backyard, go pill around and do some stuff. I sleep out there about 30 minutes, an hour, then kind of like an incline coming out of my backyard to the house. I was like her. I almost thought I would have to stop and crawl up the hill to the house, because I was just used to doing stuff. I was a mechanic for the city of Prattville for 28 years and 4 months, and we worked on the 18-wheeler tires and steel belted tires and stuff. They're heavy, but it changed your whole life. Your way of life changed. But if you got to, as my wife said, you got to push and pray. keep pushing, because it's nothing that, you know, we can't do nothing about it, but pray and hope that the Lord can instill in these doctors what to do. Because in all of us sitting up here, we're not old. I think I'm. we're not old yet. I'm 71. Yeah, I'm looking at 72. I'm not planning on, you know. And I got my children here with me, my daughter, Dr. Robinson, and my son, Robert L. Robinson the third. So they know all about this stuff. I explained it to them when I found out I had. Pardon me.
Call your nieces and nephews.
Yeah, I called all my nieces and nephews and made sure that they knew about this stuff. Get yourself checked. Because you don't know, you know. And then I'm gonna say this because I talk a lot. My wife, she had to bump me like that to me. I was talking to my brother-in-law. Now this is my sister's husband, and we were talking about medication and stuff. He said, "Well, I take that Ambutra." He said, "I got the amyloidosis too." I said, "Now you ain't no kin to me, but you got amyloidosis." So he had the same thing that I have in Chicago. He lives in Chicago, Illinois. He's from Arkansas. They had the same thing that I have, but none of my other siblings, anybody, had been shown with my mother and father and stuff. Never saw nothing like that with them, but just only me. So I think that's pretty well my story.
Thank you. I think what you brought into this story, thank you. Yeah, thank you for sharing. I think what you brought into this story is that nature of what we hinted to earlier, which is that this can be hereditary. And people that look like us tend to have a higher risk of carrying the gene variant or the hereditary condition that you can pass down. And so each of these individuals that you just heard from are carriers of that variant, and that variant turned into amyloidosis. And so I love, Mr. Robinson, that you spoke to that and how you reached out and called your family members so that they could get tested. That can be a really tough conversation. And with that, I want to come back to Mr. Otis and Miss Winnie, because that's actually your story. Your story is that, Mr. Otis, you were diagnosed, you found out you had hereditary amyloidosis, and there is another form that is not hereditary, but you found out you have hereditary amyloidosis. What did you do when you found out it was hereditary?
When I found out that it was hereditary, I remember Jason, he told me that I had to be the champion in my family, that I needed to contact all of my siblings, all of my nieces and nephews, and my children, and I had to be the champion. I had to insist that they would get tested, and that's what I did. And so I think the majority of my family, all of them got tested. You know, maybe with the exception of a few, maybe a few nephews, and maybe, you know, a few nieces, but the majority of my family, they got tested. And the only one that tested positive after my diagnosis was my sister Winnie, and then my oldest sister Margie. We was the only two that, yeah, she's 82, and then we was the only two that was diagnosed with it. But if I can, I just want to go back for a moment. I just want to share this as well. I was listening at him, said he was only 71, and I'm 71 as well. But you know, I was very active. I'm very active. We raise cattle, and I've always been active. I still work. But what I noticed was maybe when I was maybe early 69, maybe late 68, early 69, at my age, that I noticed that I was starting to get a little fatigued. I couldn't work as long. I couldn't go as long as I normally would. And really I chalked it up to being close to being 70 years old. But as it started to happen a little bit more, I guess maybe a little bit more consistent, I started to get a little concerned. But again, it didn't ever last long. You know, I just chalked it up to being almost 70 years old. And because I used to hear my dad say that, you know, he couldn't do the things that he used to do. But as I went along, as I found out after I was diagnosed, the age was not it. That was not it. It was this condition that I had that I just wasn't aware of. So, but these are the things that when, you know, I just wanted to share with the audience is that when you know your body, and when you start feeling things, don't just brush it off, because that's a way of that your body is speaking to you and letting you know that something is not quite right. And so, and you know, I don't know if, I don't know if I had maybe gone to a doctor at that time, it might not have happened that way. But I'm thankful that it did happen the way that it did happen. Not that I got sick, but I'm thankful for the way it happened, because I got the proper diagnosis. And that's the main thing.
So, Mr. Robinson, yeah.
And one more thing is, it's very important that you get tested soon as possible. Don't wait. And just because isn't that him talking, I thought about just because there's not nothing showing in your family trait that you don't have. It might be good even though you have no symptoms or nothing. Go get checked. Because the longer you wait, the more symptoms you have. Just like everybody up here but me could walk up here and step up these stairs. But the nerve thing with me got me where I had to use this walker. But it seemed to me that I'm getting stronger since I started going to exercise class. I'm getting stronger, and I may be able to put this walker down. That's my plan. That's my plan. That's the plan. To get rid of this walker, because I'm not, you know, one that want everything done for me, even though my wife, she take good care of me now. Don't let nobody fool you. She got me covered. and you know, the scripture said that's your covering. And I'm hers. So it's just a lot to be thankful for. God got it all in control.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Ms. Winnie, I want to ask you one last question, and then we're going to do the round robin that we talked about, where I'm going to ask each of you the same question. But Ms. Winnie, I want to go back to, so we can talk a lot about getting genetic testing to find out if this condition may impact you, but sometimes that's a tough decision to make for yourself. What made you want to be tested?
Because even though I had gone from a doctor to the next doctor, I had worn heart monitors after heart monitors, and neither doctor that I had gone to could tell me what was going on. So I had started to begin to accept the way that I felt. Even though I knew it was not normal, well, maybe it's normal for me. And I will say this much. I think the thing that kept me going was my faith in God. Even though the doctor didn't know, I always felt like, God, you know. So you keep me where, and you know, God, I believe in divine healing, but I also believe in common sense. When you know something is wrong, you go to a doctor and let them examine you and test you. So when Otis had called me and told me what was going on with him, I was the first somebody to get up here, because I knew that something was not right. And I admire, you know, people that stand on their faith, because I stood on mine for years when I didn't know what it was. And I trusted God to take care of me. But when I was presented with the opportunity to get checked, get genetic testing, I got it. I got it. And so I would say to anybody, yes, you use your faith, but you also use the resources that God has given you through the doctors. because God is going to meet you at the point of your faith. And that's where you start. But you go to the doctor, you get checked out, and then you know better about how to use your faith. Because I'm going to tell you, some days I made it by sheer will. I would not give in, I would not give up, and I kept right on pressing, I kept right on going. But now, by the grace of God, I can tell a difference in my body. And I know. You know, bless the doctors and thank God I'm getting better. And research. I wasn't ashamed. I said, I'm going and I'm going to get tested. And because of that, and I thank God for it, because my youngest son came and got tested and found out he had not the amyloid, but he had the part that deals with cardiomyopathy. Because the doctor had told him years ago, he said, Mr. Childs, go home, sit down, do whatever you want to do. Lay down and never move again or go play basketball. One of these days, you're going to drop dead. Because cardiomyopathy is what athletes have when they are playing and running down the court and all of a sudden they're dead. That's what he had. But I said, Jermaine, no, we're going to stand on our faith. But when he came to get tested for the amyloid, they found out what he had. And I thank God that all of this was for a purpose. Because they diagnosed him for what he has, and he is 75% better than what he was. And he is only, when he was diagnosed, he was in his early 30s. And right now he is 44, and he is going strong. We don't worry about him dropping dead no more. That's a thing of the past, because he comes and gets his shots on time. He gets his EKG, EEG. He get all that stuff done. And I thank God for that. Because what was found with Otis and found in me caused him to find out what was wrong with him. And it's just a blessing.
Yeah, and that's why we want to have these conversations, is how do you spark that conversation? So Mr. Otis, Mr. Robinson, I'm going to give you just a few moments. Do you have any last words before we step off the stage?
I guess the last words is, just pay attention to your body. And, don't be afraid to have this conversation with your doctors. And, and this is one thing, that I love about my doctor. She's sitting over here right now, that they listen to you. I mean, they listen to you and they work with you. And that's important. And so when you know that your body is not right, don't hold back. Don't just brush it off. Share it. And just let them know that you know your body, you know what's going on, how you are feeling, and just share that with them. And so just don't brush it off. That would be the thing that I would want to share with them. Oh yeah, and the medication, my wife just keep telling me, and the medication that I'm taking, it helps. I mean, it really has helped me, because my energy level is, I'm not where I was, but I'm not where I was either on September 29th. I am a lot better because of the medication that I take every 3 months.
Mr. Robinson, last words?
Last words. It's important that you go to the doctor. A lot of us, we pay insurance premium every payday and don't go to the doctor for years. So now you paying the insurance, every 6 months you get a free checkup. Go to the doctor, because your body will fool you sometimes. It'll have you feeling good, as you would think, and then but come to find out because when I found out I had congestive heart failure, I was about a month from dead. My heart rate was down to 25%. And I wasn't even dizzy. But I was way overweight. I was like 280. And you can measure me, I ain't hardly that tall. But I was at 280 like I had folk laughing. I said, I could fall down and roll where I wanted to go. And that's one thing too, I know we like to eat, and I ain't saying nothing about no eating, cause I'm gonna eat as long as I stay alive. But we need to watch our weight, cause it helps a lot to watch your weight. But anyway, this amyloidosis is something that is serious. And like I said, it messes with your nerves. That's why I can't walk without this walker. It'll attack my muscle nerves, and I can't stand a long time without that walker, without some support. It causes me to lose strength. And like I said, I was strong enough, everybody feared me because I was just, a little stump when I was wrestling and stuff.
And on that note.
But it's something, it's always good to have laughter because it's good for you. But we need to look at this thing seriously. Everybody here today that haven't been tested need to go get tested, whether you think you got it or not, because you don't know. I ain't had no idea I had a lot of this stuff that's going on with me, but all my life I've been active. Football player when I was a little boy living in the country, running through the woods, jumping in ditches, and doing some of everything, and never felt farming, never felt tired. Loading watermelons and stuff, watermelon weigh more than I did. Yeah. But I'm a hush, cause I see you give me that look. I ain't
I'm watching you.
But we thank you. We thank you for inviting us here today, and I really enjoyed it. I always like to have fun. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thanks. Thank you to all the panelists for sharing your stories. We turn it over.
Let's give another hand for the panel. And also for our moderator, Jocelyn Ashford. I think she did a great job. Thank you very much, Ms. Ashford. Mr. Robinson, don't feel bad about your wife nudging you when you start talking. My wife says trees will fall down because I talk so long to them just to get away from me. So don't worry about it, man. That's exactly what I do. I keep on talking too. We're going to bring up our next speaker, Dr. Lawrence Sanders. Dr. Sanders is a graduate of the Vanderbilt University College of Medicine. He did his residency in internal medicine at Emory University College of Medicine, followed by a Master's of Business Administration at the Wharton School of Business in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He is the past president of the Atlanta Medical and Georgia State Medical Associations, and he's also past president of the National Medical Association, the largest organization of African-American physicians. Currently, Dr. Sanders is the physician advisor for clinical documentation and improvement, care management, and hospital throughput for Grady Hospital System in Atlanta, and he's also the chief medical officer for HEAL Collaborative. Dr. Sanders is going to speak to us about what is heart disease, health disparities, prevention, early detection, and management. Dr. Sanders.
That's better? All right. Good morning, everybody. First, giving honor First, giving honor to God who makes all of this possible, for which none of us would be here otherwise. And then I want to just say thank you to this church for inviting us, but more importantly, I really want to take a moment just to say thank you and express my real appreciation for the panel, because I think you did something that is very important, and that is to share your experiences with others all the way through. That really helps all of us learn. And for me, as a physician, I learned a lot from listening. All right? So what I'd like to do for the next few minutes is talk about what's breaking my heart. I want to talk about what is heart disease. You gonna give me some slides for me? Okay. Oh, perfect. All right. I want to talk about what's breaking my heart. I want to talk about what is heart disease. I want to talk about how common is it? How do you know if you have it? What you should do if you got it? And how do you take care of your heart? Those are the things I want to do in the next few minutes. But more importantly, I think the best part of it is that you all told the story that I want to tell. So I'm going to draw on many of the things that you say during the process. Next slide. Next slide. All right. I think you've heard that heart disease is the leading cause of death in this country. If you think about it this way, we have about 330 million people who live in this country. In 2022, and health statistics are compiled and reported every 2 years. So the most recent ones we have would be 2022. 2023 is about to come out. But if you look at this, you'll see that heart disease is by far the leading cause of death among these 330 million people. And there were about 700,000, almost 800,000 people who died of heart disease. And if you look at this, it's kind of equally distributed between men and women. Women sometimes have different symptoms and more heart disease, but men also have heart disease, and it is the leading cause. And I think if you look down, you'll see cancer. This is from 2022. You'll see COVID-19. You'll see stroke. You'll see unintentional injuries. Now translate that to accidents, and the reason we call it unintentional injuries is because we can do something about unintentional injuries, and we talk about accidents as something we can't do anything about. But the more important thing I want to talk about is that if you look at that little box right to the right, those were the leading causes of death at the turn of the last century in the 1900s. You'll see the first 3 or 4 things are influenza, pneumonia, tuberculosis, diarrhea. Those are infections. One of the things that we've been able to do in this business of care, healthcare, medicine, is really treat those things. But if you look at the next group of things, heart disease, stroke, kidney disease, unintentional injuries, and cancer, we've been struggling with those as a people since the beginning. And that's the point I want to make. So heart disease is common. It occurs among all people living, and there are a number of things that we can do to prevent it. Next slide. Like many things, heart disease occurs disproportionately among African American people, among black people. This looks at the deaths by percentages, and you'll see that about 22-23% of all the heart disease deaths occur among black people. And so that's the point I want to make, that we bear a disproportionate burden of this disease. Not new, not old, not something that I'm going to fight about, but it's something that I want us to be aware of, because working together, we can make this change. Next slide. Different from the stories that you've heard about amyloidosis, when most of us think about heart disease, the first thing we think about is a heart attack. That I'm having a heart attack. My chest is hurting, I'm gonna fall on the floor, and yes, that's the leading cause of death. It accounts for about half of all people who die from heart disease. But it also gives me an opportunity to talk about now, to take a step back from amyloid and talk about what are the other things that can cause heart disease. And you'll see that picture to the side, you'll see the rhythm. And I thought it was very interesting that Ms. Winnie talked about how she felt like her heart was beating abnormally. It was beating fast, it would slow down, and sometimes it felt like it was going to jump out of her chest, and she would just calm down, and she went through this for years. So that's one of the major things that the heart does, is that it keeps the rhythm, that keeps the blood flowing, that keeps the muscles of the heart pumping. So it's got electrical activity. The next thing is that you've got those muscles out there that then can pump the blood, and then you've got the valves that separate the chambers, right? And then you also have the muscle of the heart. And I think one of the things that you heard from the group that talked about amyloid is that it's a protein that infiltrates the muscle of the heart, but it affects all parts of the heart, right? And the other thing I want to just kind of bring into this as a primary care physician is that I also heard here from Mr. Robert that his nerves were involved as well, and that the amyloid also impacted his nerves. Amyloid can deposit everywhere. The heart is just one of those places that it deposits, and often some of the deposits other places may give insight into what's going on with the heart. So we have to think about that as well. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Now, what this slide is, a whole lot of words on this slide. I'm going to try to make it as simple as I can. But what this slide aims to do is really talk about all kinds of heart disease, or at least the ones that we know about at this time. And as we go around it, the first one, you'll see that there's valve disease. Well, if you think about it this way, the heart has 4 chambers that really get the blood moving through. And between each of those chambers is a set of valves. Almost like in a pipe, when you want to stop the water from flowing, you have the valve. Well, so what happens with those valves is things can collect on those valves, they can get infected, and they just don't work, all right? So you can have valvular heart disease. And most often the symptom of that is a heart murmur. Often it's a heart murmur, but it can be any number of things. So we come on around and we talk about aneurysms. Aneurysms, so we talked about blood vessels in the heart, we talked about the electrical system, we talked about the muscles, but the blood vessels, particularly those that come out of the heart, are big blood vessels, and we can get something called an aneurysm. Now, the best way I know how to describe what an aneurysm is, I'm gonna tell my age because I'm not too far behind. You know, when you had that bicycle and you were riding and you ride it until the tire gets really thin and the inner tube starts to pop out, and then if you keep riding it, that inner tube breaks, that's what an aneurysm is. That's the best way I know how to describe it, all right? But you can have an aneurysm of the big vessels. So that's another kind of heart disease. Amyloid doesn't really contribute to that. That has to do with a number of other different things. But I come on around and we talk about arrhythmias. The electrical system doesn't work. Amyloid, I think you heard, can cause problems with the electrical system. Sometimes if these other parts of the heart don't work, the valves and other things, so one of the first things you can feel sometimes is your heart beating funny. Feels like it's gonna beat out of your chest. So that's the electrical system. And one of the things that you really talked about that resonated with me is when your heart slowed down, okay? And I think that's important to pay attention to, is how your heart is beating. If we come on around, we talk about the muscles and cardiomyopathy. I think you talked about your son having what we call just below the aorta, cardiomyopathy that can close down and the blood won't flow, but it can also impact other parts of the muscle as well. If you think about it as things just getting caught in the muscle, the amyloid is one of those, it's a protein. But that muscle could also be impacted by infection, by other medicines, by any number of things that make the heart stiff. And it just doesn't pump as well as it can. And that's why when you went to the doctor the first time, that's what you had, because your heart was stiff, your legs were swelling, and if we don't listen, we think it's congestive heart failure because that's the most common cause of it, and we give you things to get rid of the fluid, which may or may not always help, but that's cardiomyopathy, and amyloid may be part of that, or one of those causes. You come on around, you got a covering on the heart. If that covering gets stiff, you can also have symptoms. And if we come on around, we have heart failure. Heart failure usually comes about because the heart has worked too hard, because we didn't get a blood pressure treated, and it gets dilated, and we start to collect fluid, and you just can't get all the blood out of the heart. So that's heart failure. So those are all the things that can go wrong with the heart and all the different kinds of diseases. Next slide. So how do you know if you got anything, if any of these things going on? I don't really have to tell you very much because the panel here told you what all the symptoms were. They laid it out from their own personal experiences. And I think that what I would kind of go through is that we talk about racing of the heart, pounding of the heart, sweating. Those things go along with the heart not getting enough blood and the muscle not getting enough blood. But you can have lightheadedness. I think I heard that. Mr. Otis, I think you said it very well. You said that I got up and I just felt a little dizzy, but he also told you something else. He sat back down, thinking it was going to get better. Man after my own heart. Then he kept going, and I'm not speaking as a doctor now. I'm speaking as who I am and what I know, because doctors can sometimes be the worst patients. All right? But anyway, he said he didn't really feel well, but he just couldn't get up, and he thought if he kept going, I'm glad he can go back out there to try to work on those cows, which is what I might. But he has sense enough to call his wife. And the other important part is he didn't tell her what was going on. All right? And so those symptoms are important. And we can go through all of these. We've all spent through, we really talked about all of them. You couldn't lay down at night. You couldn't sit up. You had to sit up. So any number of these things can be symptoms of heart disease. Now, there's one thing that I would tell you. If you're having these symptoms, and if you got somebody who cares about you, get them to write them down for you. And sometimes you might want to write them down despite of it. Because sometimes when we go to the doctor, some of us don't tell the doctor the symptoms. We want the doctor to tell us that there's nothing wrong. Next slide. And if I don't tell them enough, then there's nothing wrong. Now, I'm gonna be very clear. The more people who do that look like me. Women don't tend to do that. They tend to tell you what's wrong. Not all of them, but most of them. But most of the people who look like me, we go sit in the doctor's office, I'm all right. Ain't nothing wrong. I ain't nothing wrong. And my experience has been that my most important thing is to listen to everybody. And so so if I got symptoms, what do? Go see your physician or a clinician. Go find one you like and find them before we have to find one for you. Now, you know what I mean? You understand what I'm saying? If you go find one yourself, you get to choose. But if you end up in the emergency room, you don't got no choice. All right? So the most important thing I'm going to tell you, and I heard this loud and clear from the panel, and it's probably the most important thing I learned in medical school. If the doctor doesn't listen to you, get up, smile, and say, how you doing? Walk out and go find yourself another one. All right? Like everything else. You know, and here's the reason I say that is because one of the best teachers in medical school, and somebody on the panel said it, which means it resonated with me, is you need to learn to listen to the patient because they know more about their disease than you do. And your job is to listen long enough that you can help. And so that's what you should be looking for in your doctor. And the other thing is, don't get upset when they ask you to tell that story again. Because every time as a clinician, as a physician, every time you tell me your story, I'm trying to listen carefully to hear the things that I didn't hear the first time, so you don't have to keep coming back. Well, no, I can't say that. But so you don't have to keep going from doctor to doctor to doctor, okay? So that's why it's important to be able to tell that story and to be able to understand what your symptoms are. And if your doctor, as I said before, and this is important, if your doctor doesn't listen to those symptoms, get up and go. And I think that I don't really have to tell the story because I think Ms. Winnie and Mr. Otis really told the importance of knowing what else is going on with your other family members, okay? Because that's your family history. And if the doctor doesn't do your physical exam, then there's something wrong. So that's important as well. So the doctor's got to listen, and the physician's got to lay some hands on to understand what's going on. The way I think about it is I listen to try to figure out what I think is going on. I do the physical exam to confirm it, and then the next thing I do is then get lab tests to help me even get a better idea of what's going on. And there's a series of lab tests here. I think you talked about the blood test. I'm 99.9% sure you got what's called an EKG, an electrocardiogram. I'm willing to bet you got an echocardiogram, because that begins to tell you what's really going on. And so then we go on, and these are all the other tests, all right? So now we've been talking about basically heart disease, what it is, how to diagnose it, and then what we do. Now, next slide. So what do we do to treat it? Well, if you see the first thing up there, it says change your lifestyle. But I'm going to drop down to the next one first, and that is take your medicines. That there will be medicines prescribed that will help you. I think that it was very interesting in the story, I think Ms. Winnie and Mr. Otis, when you found out half your family members were on the same medicine, and they're all beta blockers to try to help control that heart rate. So, if you talk to each other, talk about what your medicine's on, but most of us don't want nobody to know we on medicines. Am I right, Mr. Otis? All right, so then take your medicines. And then there's sometimes surgery will be, particularly for those areas where there's a valve problem or where the blood vessels aren't supplying enough blood to the muscle of the heart. Those are areas where we can do surgery and correct that. But if you'll see that cardiac rehab thing there, where it's supervised exercise, supervised diet, and supervised support with changing your lifestyle. It gets back up to what we were talking about in the beginning. This is about changing your lifestyle. It's about watching what you eat. Watching what you eat. Making sure that we don't eat too much fat. Now, the best way I know how to talk about that, because that also leads to some of this coronary artery disease. And most of your country people like me, you know what to put down the drain and what not to put down the drain. All right? But you'll turn around and eat what was cooked in that stuff that you won't put down the drain. Because what happens if you put it down the drain? It clogs it up. So that's the first thing, is we got to watch fats. If you smoke, you need to quit yesterday. And you need to get out and get some exercise. Now, here's what I'm going to tell you. Now, I'm speaking to the men in the room. Most of us want to go out and exercise like we did when we were 15. And then the next day we can't move, and then we don't do it no more. So really what you have to do is start slowly, walking easily. So that's what I would say is what you need to do. Next slide. This next slide really looks at what do you need to do to keep your heart healthy. And we've really talked about most of those things. If you have high blood pressure, you need to get it treated. If you got high cholesterol, you need to get it treated. Tobacco, we talked about. Get up off the couch, walk around. If it's just starting walking around your house 2 or 3 times a day, and then walking down the street until you can do it a little bit better. So you don't have to do it, you don't have to be 15 again, or as if Mr. Roberts said, you can't go back out and wrestle like you did when you were in high school, all right? That kept you healthy. If you got diabetes, it needs to be treated. And the kind of the thing that brings this whole story together, all of this is connected. All of it is connected. So these are the kind of risk factors for heart disease: high blood pressure, high cholesterol, not getting up and doing what you need to do, diabetes, overweight, obesity, air pollution can add to it. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that if you live in an area with high air pollution, it's unlikely that you're going to be able to walk and move around. Kidney disease, physical inactivity, and alcohol. I'm not sure what the verdict is on alcohol. I think some folks have tried to say use alcohol in moderation. I think today we're moving in the direction that we may need to move away from alcohol altogether. I don't know the answer on that one just yet. Next slide. So what do you need to do? This is really about eating. You know, the more color you have on your plate, the better. Now let's put this in perspective. Green beans, nice color, right? But if you add a piece of fat back to it, it becomes a fried food. So really what we're gonna have to do is learn how to make soul food healthy food. And it's not so much for us, but it's for our grandchildren. It's for our children, our grandchildren, and their children. Because so much of what we learn from each other is how to eat and what tastes good. You know, how do you learn what tastes good? Your mother tasted. All right, that's not quite right. Put a little salt on it. Taste it again. So if you learn to taste it without that salt, it's easier to live without salt. All right? And to cut back on salt. The other thing that's on this I think is very important, things that come in bags, things that come in cans, we need to limit those as much as possible because they've got preservatives, they've got added salt, and they've got added preservatives and other things. You know, so that's really, really important. Now, I'm going to share with you something else. You know, when I was growing up, there were not always diet sodas. But then diet sodas came along, and the first, I'm going to date myself again, the first one was called Diet Right. You remember it? And remember it tasted bitter? It tasted bitter, tasted bad. You know what the makers did? They put a little salt in it. And it didn't taste bad anymore. And now we got every diet soda under the sun. All right? So really you kind of have to really look at what you're eating. The more color on your plate, the better off you are. Now, we talked about amyloidosis, we talked about heart disease, we talked about a number of different things. Now, we talked about eating right. And then when I was listening earlier and I heard about a restaurant that served ribs and bacon and all of these kinds of things, right? I'm gonna leave you with one quote. And this comes from, next slide. This comes from Michelle Obama. And that is that when you're trying to do all these things right, it's hard to do it when the world ain't helping you, all right? So it's really on us to work together to really try to keep ourselves healthy and keep each other healthy, all right? Thank you very much, and I'll be around to answer some questions later on.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Sanders. Also not from Georgia Southern. Our next speaker is Dr. Garima Arora. She's medical school training at Kasturba Medical College in Manipal, India, then followed up by training at the University of Alabama School of Medicine. She did an internal medicine residency at the Boston University and a cardiology fellowship here at the University of Alabama. She's currently an associate professor in the Division of Cardiovascular Medicine at the University of Alabama, where she's also the medical director of echocardiography, co-director of the Cardiac MRI Lab, co-director of the Cardiovascular Genomics Clinic, and she has a particular interest in amyloidosis and hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. Today, Dr. Arora will tell us about what is amyloidosis, symptoms, diagnosis, and advocating for your care. Dr. Arora.
Thank you, everyone, for inviting me and giving me an opportunity to speak to you. Thank you, panelists. Your stories were really a learning opportunity, not only for the audience in the room, for me as well. Just learning how you have gone through your journey and how I can do better to help whoever comes to visit me in my clinic. So this quote always stays with me. What the eyes cannot see what the mind does not know. And it kind of applies here completely, right? So if we do not know what's cardiac amyloidosis or amyloidosis in general, we will not diagnose it. And it's not only true for patients, but it is also true for physicians. Just before we started, we were having a discussion. So when I trained in Boston University, they have a big cardiac amyloid center. And at that time, we would diagnose our patients, but we would have no treatment for them. And we will just manage symptomatically, give them medications to control their blood pressure, to bring the blood pressure up. Midodrine is one of the drugs, some of you may have heard about it. And we just said, we really can't help you. And in a short span of 15 to 20 years, we have made huge progress. The research we have done, the medications have been made with our industry partners here, and we have now treatments to treat cardiac amyloidosis. And that has brought a lot of awareness among physicians and also efforts like this to bring it out there so that we all learn what is cardiac amyloidosis and how you guys can advocate when you have symptoms once you know what it is. So I'm just going to briefly summarize what everybody has already talked about, just to tell you what is cardiac amyloidosis. Okay? Can we put my slides? All right. Next slide, please. Next slide. Do I have a... Okay, next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, so why amyloidosis matter? So amyloidosis is a complex disease which involves, so I'll just, so amyloidosis. So amyloidosis, as we've already heard, it's not only a disease of heart, but it affects multiple organ systems in the body. So amyloid is an abnormal protein which is built up in our body, and it goes and deposits in various organs, and we can have symptoms according to where they have deposited. Okay, so what we're going to talk today is what is amyloid, how you can talk about it to your physician, and what we can do to help you. Okay, next slide. So amyloid is a protein which is misfolded, and then it goes and sticks to different organs in the body, and depending upon where they are, we get symptoms. Next slide. Okay. So it can affect your heart. It can cause cardiac amyloidosis. It can affect nerves, can cause carpal tunnel syndrome, can cause peripheral neuropathy in legs, can cause lumbar stenosis. It can also cause Alzheimer's disease. We all know of it. And amyloid deposition is what results in Alzheimer's disease. It can also affect kidneys. You can have proteinuria, which is frothy urine. So that could be early sign to diagnose kidney involvement in amyloid disease. You can also have non-specific GI symptoms. So you can have just anorexia, don't feel like eating, you can have diarrhea, you can have constipation. So just non-specific symptoms which sometimes we would never put together if you did not mention it to your physician. It can also affect liver. It can sometimes result in enlargement of tongue, in drooping of the eyelids with deposition. So just as we were already talking, please write down your symptoms and tell them, because they may not be, you may not, you may not feel that that's relevant to your overall problem, or that's not relevant for a cardiologist, but please do mention so that we can think about it and put it together. Next slide, please. So what would you feel? So this has all been said earlier. You may feel tired all the time. You may have swelling in your legs. You may have swelling in your stomach, so fluid buildup. You can feel that you are short of breath on minimal exertion. You were able to do, like Mr. Leonard said, you were able to do your work okay, and then gradually over some time, you just can't do it, and which is not normal, right? You may have irregular heartbeat, slow, fast, just irregular. You can have numbness and tingling in your hands. You can have diarrhea, constipation. You can have blood pressure problems. You can have high blood pressure, and then you can have low blood pressure. And in medical term, we call it labile blood pressure. So it's just not easy to control. Sometimes it's high, sometimes low. What medication do I give you, right? And that we've struggled with Mr. Leonard to figure out. But then he has been an advocate for himself. He would call me. I may not have an answer, but we would, work together something and figure out maybe we need to cut down the medication. Maybe we need to take it in the morning or at night or just skip a day, something. But what we are emphasizing is you need to tell your physician what's happening, okay, and be aware of those symptoms. Next slide, please. So as we talked about, how does it affect heart per se? So the abnormal protein goes inside the heart and it gets stuck there, okay? So it makes the heart stiff. So it affects the muscle of the heart, and it can cause congestive heart failure, as we already heard Mr. Robertson say. So congestive heart failure can have many causes, and this is one of the cause, okay? So when somebody tells you you have congestive heart failure, you need to ask your doctor why. Is it because of coronary artery disease? Is it because something is deposited in there, so which is cardiac amyloidosis, other diseases like hypertrophic cardiomyopathy or sarcoidosis? So those are other terms you may hear, but you need to ask your physician, why do I have it? So very important. It can also affect the electrical system, like Ms. Childs said. It can also affect the heart valves. So it can cause aortic stenosis, so which is the narrowing of the main valve which prevents blood from heart to aorta. So it pushes the heart blood to go from heart to aorta. It's the main valve of the heart. It can cause its narrowing. With that narrowing, what symptoms we patients feel is usually dizziness, shortness of breath, or chest pain. So when you go to a physician, that's very easy to diagnose. Aortic stenosis is easy to diagnose. They'll try, go fix it. Now we don't even have to do open heart surgery to fix it. We can just go through your groin, through the femoral artery, and put a new valve, right? You may have seen commercials about it. But what they don't see that there's 25% of those patients have amyloid disease. So very important that if you had your valve replaced and you don't feel well after that valve replacement, there may be something else going on, okay? So always ask, why did I get, even why is my heart valve, not working? Why is it tight? Okay. Next slide, please. Next slide. So who is at risk? So older individuals, as we grow old, we can develop amyloid proteins, which can get deposited. Patients who have chronic inflammation or long-term illness, diseases like multiple myeloma and other diseases, they can also get amyloid. And also genetic form, we talked about, which are hereditary, can be passed on. And we've seen that about 3 to 4% increased genetic incidence of cardiac amyloidosis in African American population. And Ms. Combs is going to talk more about the genetic predisposition of this disease after my talk. Next slide, please. So there's not just one kind of amyloid. So if you or your family member hear that somebody has amyloid, their treatment may not be same as the other person's treatment, So we have AL amyloid and the ATTR amyloid. So the treatment, these are abnormal proteins, so different kind of proteins, and their treatment varies. Okay? So just to keep in mind that all amyloid are not same. Okay? They may have same symptoms though, okay? But the treatment is different. Next slide, please. Okay. So as we've been talking, symptoms can be vague. We need to connect some dots. We need to solve the puzzle of whether this is amyloid or not, okay? So it can be tricky. Usually the diagnosis starts with listening to patient's history and then ordering appropriate tests. We do a bunch of blood tests, urine tests, EKG, echocardiography, cardiac MRI, and once all those are back, sometimes we need muscle biopsy or nerve biopsies to confirm, and also genetic testing, okay? So I've had patients who are okay with just the blood work and the urine work, and then they do not want the biopsy done, and it sometimes limits our diagnostic capability if we're not able to, do all the testing and then provide appropriate treatment. Okay, next slide. Okay. So again, saying the same thing, we've heard how it can be misdiagnosed, right? So cardiac amyloid overlaps with lots of other things, and it presents as symptoms of those things, right? So you have valvular heart disease, you have conduction problems. So, okay, so you can have arrhythmias, and you can have heart failure symptoms, which are swelling in the leg, shortness of breath, but they can be caused by other disease processes as well, okay? So just knowing about this disease will probably help you and the physicians to diagnose correctly and then treat correctly. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so we have treatment for it. We have protein stabilizers, which stabilize the amyloid protein, which is already built, and we have medications which slow down the buildup and also which target these faulty proteins. And we foresee that in near future, we would have therapies targeting this gene specifically so that we can, take care of it where it all started, at the gene level. So which we are very hopeful should be in near future. Okay, next slide. Okay, so what can you do? So know your family history, right? You talk to your siblings, parents, kids, talk about genetic testing, tell everyone you meet if they have any health issues to think about this disease process, and also join some support groups. Your experience can teach other people what you went through, and maybe they can pick up something and help others. Okay. Patient groups, and talk to your doctors. Next slide. So, so what we have learned doing research on amyloid these years, that yes, there is high incidence of TTR gene in African American population, and we need to test the kids and younger generation. But so in my clinic, I have lots of parents and their kids who may carry the gene, but then they do not have the disease right now. They have no symptoms, they are young, they're in their 30s. So what should they be doing, right? That's the question they ask me. What do I need to do? So if they don't have any disease manifestation, we do not start them on amyloid-specific treatments, but we do ask them to take care of their health. So control their blood pressure, control their diabetes if they have, lose weight if they need to, exercise, eat healthy. We talked about eating healthy. So what I tell my patients is, When you go to a grocery store, just stay around the corners, okay? Just not in the aisles, okay? When you go around the corner, you get fresh fruits and vegetables, you get your dairy, and you get your protein, and you come out. So canned foods has lots of preservative and lots of salt in all the foods we have. That's not good for us. So if you need to use vegetables, I recommend frozen vegetables to be used and fresh fruits. And so just around, and you'll walk, you'll get your exercises. All right, next slide. Okay, so just control your risk factors is what an important take-home point from this is. Even if you do not have symptoms, but if you have a genetic variant, just control your risk factors. Next slide. Okay. So at UAB, we have a cardiogenomics program, which is specifically targeted for inherited cardiac diseases, so which includes cardiac amyloidosis. We take care of patients who have hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, familial hyperlipidemia. They have arrhythmias, long QT syndromes, and other genetic problems. So we have help from our genetic counselors who are there with us in the clinic to navigate that process of how to, so they are very good at taking family history, so I let them do that for me, so they can, go through the family tree and talk to you about what are the effects of getting a genetic testing. Lots of people have questioned, okay, what will happen to my insurance? What will I get a life insurance? And how does it affect my kids? So those are important things to think about when you are trying to diagnose something which otherwise is not affecting other individuals who are getting tested. So Teresa Brown, this is her contact information. She could not be here. She really wanted to be here. She is our coordinator, and she is the lifeline of our clinic. So you can take her number, give her a call, and she will make sure that you get to see us in clinic as soon as possible. Next slide, please. And just again, let us know what's going on. We will screen, try to find out what's happening, and then help you in whatever way we can. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Warwick. That was really very good. I think it's Mr. Kelvin Delcher still here. Mr. Datcher? Oh, yes, please, come on up. For those of you who don't know, Mr. Kelvin Datcher is the District 52 State Representative, and let's have a few words from you. Thank you very much, sir.
Good morning. I know y'all got lunch coming, so I'm getting out the way because I don't believe in getting between people and their food, so I'm just going to say good morning. Glad to see y'all here. But I wanted to be here for a very personal reason. This past February 26th marked the 1-year anniversary of my brother's death. He was 18 months older than I was, and he had a heart attack on February 11th of last year. So while he was in the hospital there in San Francisco, the chaplain gave me this pen, and you'll see me wear it quite often, so it keeps him close to me. But also, y'all know we got to do a better job with ourselves. And I work my day jobs with the mayor's office, and we work with public safety. And we always say, if you see something, say something. Well, with your help, my doctors, Hernando Carter and his wife, Adrian Carter, my pediatrician who serves my kids, Dr. Paula Mambu, said, if you feel something, say something. And so we wait too long, and y'all know us men, we are stubborn. We don't like to go to the doctor, and our wives and friends will nag us. And then, we'll be going to the funeral home instead of going to the doctor because we didn't do what we needed to do. But it's exciting to see this many folks involved and engaged today. Hopefully we can spread the word and really change our lives. And, you know, I gave up pork a long time ago, but that fatback, Doc, I grew up in the country, y'all, so I know what it's like to have just a little bit, just a taste, as my big mama used to say. But Pastor Hamilton, it's great to have you. Thank you for having us, and you are a real visionary for hosting these kinds of programs for our community. So have a good evening.
Thank you very much, Representative Datcher. Let's move on to, now I'll remind you that we still have a little time for some questions at the end, so think about something that you may or may not want to ask. And of course, at the end of the program, when we are having lunch, and they'll be after the pastor's, you know, when he lets us out, so he'll be the thing that's holding us up from lunch, not me. But we will have a little chance after our last speaker. I'm just saying what it is, sir. But anyway, our next speaker is Ms. Alicia Gomes. Ms. Gomes has her Bachelor of Science degree from Furman University. She has a Master of Science in Genetic Counseling and Counselor from the University of the South Carolina System. She's currently an assistant professor at the University of Alabama, Birmingham, and the School of Health Professions in the Genetic Counseling Program. She's the director of the Industry Genetics and Genomics Certification. She is a genetic counselor at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, and she also is the secretary of the Alabama Board of Genetic Counseling, which I imagine next year or two you're going to be the president of that board too. I'd like to bring, Ms. Gomes is going to speak to us about genetic counseling, family history regarding genetic disorders and inherited conditions. Ms. Gomes.
Hi, everybody. Nice to see everybody today, and I promise I won't also keep you very long from your lunch. I have some slides as well. I think we have had a lot of great information already about amyloidosis and just heart disease in general. What I'm hoping to do today is to bring it back to how this fits into the family. And what does this really mean when we say something is genetic? If you could go to the next slide, please. So I'm taking you back to high school biology, so I hope you're ready for this. When we talk about genetics, what does that actually mean? If we think and zoom down into our body to each individual cell, inside of every cell is our genetic information. These are the instructions that truly make us who we are. There's so much of it that's the same from person to person, but it's those very small gene changes from person to person that can cause disease. And so when you look inside one of those cells, we have our tightly packaged genetic information. We call those chromosomes. When you unwind those, as you can see in this picture, this is the actual alphabet of our genes. So just like we read with 26 letters, our body reads with 4, A, T, C, and G. And they have to be in the right order for our body to make the proteins that it needs to survive. So you can have just one small letter change. If it's in the exact wrong spot, it can cause a genetic disorder. And so that's what we're looking for when we're talking about genetic disorders. Next slide, please. So we've talked about that these are our genes. Gene changes can cause disease. But for a lot of the big parts of our body, like the brain, the heart, the liver, you can have health issues that may be genetic, but they can also be due to things that we just like to indulge in, or maybe just the environment that we live in. And so all of these three pieces come together to really interact and explain our health. Next slide, please. For some conditions, it's more lifestyle and environment that makes the biggest, have the most important factor. So I give some examples here. We have like lung cancer. Sometimes we can have things like heart attacks. These are things where some of the life choices we make, do you like to exercise? What do you like to put on your plate? That can have a big factor in whether or not you have an increased risk for some of these health issues. Next slide. But then there are other conditions where it's almost all genetic. So I think about conditions like sickle cell anemia. This is one where it's specific gene changes that cause these disorders. And there's very little you can do from your lifestyle or your environment to change the likelihood that you'll get these conditions. Next slide. So that brings us to genetics and heart disease. So when we think about genetics and when are we concerned that genetics is playing the biggest role, there are two different types of genetic conditions that we think about. Gene changes that can affect the way the heart was made, the structure of the heart. So we've talked a lot about cardiomyopathy. That's one of those types of heart structure type things that we're looking for that might have a genetic cause. The other is the way the heart is functioning, that electrical beat. This is also due sometimes to gene changes that are causing those electrical functions to not go right. Next slide. The other piece, and the biggest piece that helps us clue in that something might be genetic, is how often is this running through a family? So on the left, you can see this is a picture of a bunch of squares and circles, which may not make a lot of sense to many, but this is a key piece in the medical field that we use to help understand what's passing through a family. We represent males with squares and circles with females, and then we use these lines to make family relationships. When people have children, we branch them down and put all the kids. And what we're trying to capture is 3 generations. So I want you to think about that. 3 generations for you would be your brothers and sisters, your mother and father and all of their brothers and sisters, so your aunts and uncles, as well as your grandparents and their brothers and sisters. That's 3 generations. And that's important for us because when we see things happening in multiple generations, that's a red flag for us that there may be a genetic cause. When it comes to many of these heart disease-related disorders, and specifically amyloidosis, this is what we call autosomal dominant. What does that actually mean? It means that it only takes 1 gene change and 1 copy of that gene to cause this disorder. So we have 2 copies of all of our genes, one we got from our mom and one we got from our dad. So when we're passing down half of our genetic information to each of our children, it just takes passing down 1 copy for the next generation to be affected. That also means if I have a gene change on one of my 2 copies, it's like flipping a coin every time I have a child on whether or not they will also inherit that gene change. So a 50-50 chance every single time. Some people get the bad end of the stick, so to speak, and they may have more than 1 child that's affected, maybe even all of their children are affected. Some people can flip that coin and none of their children are affected. So it's not a thing, sometimes we like to think about it like, oh, well, if I have 4 kids, 2 will, 2 won't. No, it's a flip of the coin every time. And so that's why it's so important to know if there is a gene change in the family, so all of the people who are in those 3 generations can get tested to find out if they may also be at risk. Next slide, please. So now let's zero in on amyloidosis. So it's already been discussed that there are, just like many of the other health issues we've been talking about, you can see this condition that is not really due to a genetic cause. And this is what we call wild type. But then there is this hereditary type that we've been talking about, and then we're more specifically talking about the TTR gene. We all have copies of the TTR gene. In fact, we all have 2 copies of this gene. What matters is the spelling of the gene. And is there a gene change, so 1 letter that's incorrect where it should be, and that would cause this disorder. When we think about African Americans specifically, there's 1 specific gene change that you can see in 3 to 4% of all African Americans. So what does that mean? If you put 100 African Americans in this room right now, that means about 3 or 4 individuals will have this gene change. That doesn't necessarily mean, like everyone else has been saying, that these individuals already have signs or symptoms. Why is that? 2 reasons. 1 is this is an adult onset disorder, so depending on how old you are, takes into account whether or not you may start to present with signs or symptoms. 2, there's this thing we think about called reduced penetrance. It means that even if you have everybody in the room and they all have this gene change, Not everybody is going to even present with signs or symptoms at the same age, in the same way, or even at all. And so because of that, you may not see all of the signs and symptoms, and that's why it's so important to get a large representation of your family and what's going on with everyone to really put all these puzzle pieces together. Next slide, please. So, we've done our family history. We've been talking to the family. We're trying to get more information about who does and does not have what health issues. Now we're concerned maybe there is a family history of amyloidosis. What does that mean when it comes to actual genetic testing? So I mentioned there's one specific gene that we would be testing, TTR. So you can do testing just for that one gene. If you already know that there's a family history, they can even zoom in further to just do testing for the one gene change we already know is running through the family. Biggest benefit of that is the cheapest approach, because when you know what you're looking for, you zero right in for it and you can just do testing for that. So that's another big benefit of if you are of concern, you get the testing, you share that information with your family so they can also just get testing for that one gene change. Maybe you're the first person in the family being tested. There's a couple different scenarios that can happen in. Maybe they're only concerned about this condition, so they only do testing for the one gene. So you can get testing as what we call a single gene and just test for that. Maybe you have health issues that are associated with this condition, but they overlap with other conditions as well. We've talked about a lot of other heart disease related things, so there's other genes that can also affect the heart. In those scenarios, they may need to do a panel. A panel means that they're testing, it could be 10 to 100 different genes in order at the same time, just as a quick way to say, do we see any gene changes in any of these genes? Another scenario, if you have health issues that are not just affecting the heart, but maybe also you have some signs and symptoms elsewhere in the body, they may decide to even branch out a little bit more and do a broader test. We call that whole exome or whole genome sequencing. That means of the tens and thousands of genes that we know are in the body, let's just do a quick read of all of them to see if we can find any gene changes. We don't like to go that broad unless we have to. So most of the time, if you're going to see a provider that's ordering genetic testing, they're either going to do that single gene or a panel. Next slide, please. So should I get tested? And now I won't spend a lot of time on this slide because this is really dependent upon what is going on in your body. And so many of our other speakers today have already truly talked about what are those features that we would expect to see in someone with this condition. Next slide. But what I do want to share are some of the other signs and symptoms that we look for just in general when heart disease may be due to a gene change. Some of the things that we think about are, people who have been noted to have quote unquote heart attacks. I say that because as Mr. Otis had spoke up, it was misdiagnosed as a heart attack for him. One of the big things that we look for in genetics in general is when we see health issues coming up at younger ages than we would expect, that our lifestyle has just caught up with us. Our benchmark is 50. So when we see things like heart attacks, heart-related disease in individuals under the age of 50, that's a significant red flag for us. There's also other subtle things that you wouldn't associate with heart disease that we can see in syndromes that include heart defects. One of the things that I think about is what we call syndactyly, and it's like webbing of the fingers. Another thing that I think about is passing out more frequently, and that can also be associated with genetic disorders that are due to that electrical function as well. So in the packet, because these slides are hard to see and there's a lot of words, in the packet you'll see that I've included a nice handout that really goes through all of the signs and symptoms and red flags that make us think about a genetic condition. I highly encourage you, the next time your family is getting together, maybe it's Easter, Thanksgiving, you're all sitting around the table, this is the best time to really talk through what is really going on in our family. What does everybody have? We don't share this type of information. We may be gossiping about each other, but we rarely talk about the actual health issues. And I think it's important to get all of the signs, all of the symptoms, and most importantly, the ages of onset. When did you start having these symptoms? Did anybody tell you why you had these signs and symptoms? These are important pieces that you need to have in a central location so that anybody in the family has access to it and they can share with each other when they go in to see a doctor. Next slide, please. That brings me to genetic counseling, which is my career path. And so what makes us different than a healthcare, like a doctor, is that we are what we consider non-directive. That means instead of telling you what to do, we're going to present you with all of your options. So for example, we may give you a couple options when it comes to genetic testing. And we help you think through the pros and the cons of it, and also help you to figure out who else in the family may be at risk and help you guide them into getting testing as well. So if you are in a rural area, maybe, you may not have direct access to a genetic counselor, but be your own advocate. If you think this is something of concern for you, ask your doctor to refer you to see a genetic counselor or to come to UAB for the cardiogenomics clinic. Next slide. Thank you. My name is Alicia, like I mentioned, and please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions.
Thank you very, very much. I'd like to bring back, if we could, Dr. Sanders, come on up here. Dr. Rohr, if you'd come on up. Ms. Wendy, why don't you come up? Brother Otis, if you get you two come up here also. I'm going to take this away. Good, good. I don't know if anything's wrong with him or not, but you know he's the last one up here. I don't know. All right. If you have written down anything, raise your hand and I'll come get the card. Otherwise, I'm sorry. Okay, so I think we got to start with one thing. We've seen this lettering TTR a couple of times. Whatever. It is a protein that is normal in our bodies, if I'm not mistaken. So tell me, what does TTR stand for? I'm going to start with you, Dr. Aurora, let you tackle this. And you got to say the word right, too. Say it 3 times in a row, and it's because it's a tongue twister. And then tell us, what does the protein actually do?
Transthyretin. 3 times?
Yeah.
So it is a protein which is made in liver, and it is a normal building block of our body. So when it gets a mutation, which is single letter change in that gene, it gets misfolded. So when it's misfolded, it does not do its purpose right. So it cannot go and fit in our building block like a Lego, where it would have if there was no misfolding. So now this misfolding makes it sticky, and it does not go where it's supposed to go, but goes everywhere else.
Well, it's important for thyroid function, isn't it? Isn't it important for thyroid function?
No.
No? I thought it was one of those things. And back in the old days, again, I mentioned how long ago when I was in medical school that we talked about that being a protein that was carrying around for thyroid, and we looked at it in terms of thyroid function. But okay, not anymore. Told me, didn't she? Very politely, I might add. All right. I want to ask one other question. Are we making the diagnosis? Garima, tell me. Are we making the diagnosis more now, or are we seeing the disease more?
So the disease has been there. We just not have been diagnosing it. So, and again, it's education, awareness. All the physicians are getting more aware about this disease because there is push by all the major societies, which is American Heart Association, American College of Cardiology, and all internal medicine societies, to make physicians aware of what are the red flags for this disease. And that has helped for them to pick up and advocate for testing those patients who have non-specific vague symptoms. So the disease has been there, we just now more proactive at diagnosing it.
All right, Alicia, you want to add to that?
I also wanted to add that one big milestone that we had in 2014-ish was there was an explosion in the ability for us to do genetic testing. So that meant that there was more access and more people who were able to get genetic testing that didn't have access to it before. And so because of that, there has also been the ability to see that there are more people that have this gene change than we expected. We also now have testing like that whole exome or whole genome that I was talking about. And in the same way, in the cardiology space, there's been a push for this to be educated on and diagnosed. Also in the genetic space, it's one of those gene changes, even if you're getting testing for something else. If you're getting whole exome or whole genome, this is on the list of gene changes that they will report on no matter what.
So,
I want to add
Yes,
on
ma'am.
to that. So, I have a patient who had the genetic testing done a few years ago, and there was nothing diagnosed, but she still continued to have symptoms. We went back and did it again, and she was positive for TTR. So I want to emphasize that if you've had genetic testing once and didn't find anything, the technology is changing so fast that it doesn't mean that you stop advocating, that it's possible that we just didn't have technology to pick it up 5 years ago, but now we can. So that's an important point to keep in mind.
Mr. Leonard, Ms. Childs, you went and told your family to go get tested. How did you broach that, and what was their initial reception?
The way I approached it was, they knew that I had an event. They knew that I was sick. And, and I just went to all of them and talked to as many as I could personally, and trying to encourage them to how important it was. Because, I let them know that this was no joke, that, that you don't want this, because it would change your life. And so that was my approach.
Who's the oldest person in the family?
Our sister Margie.
Okay, what about you? No, so you're older than he is, you said, right? I wouldn't believe it by looking at you, but anyway. I may have been a butt doctor, but I ain't totally stupid. Now look, so you went and told your younger siblings to get tested. They listened to you more than they did to him? Truthfully.
Sorta, kinda, yeah.
But you did to get that. Okay, we're gonna hold that thought. We're gonna come back to it in a minute. Dr. Sanders, you told us all these wonderful foods we can't eat anymore. So tell me, what are some of the heart-healthy foods that are low in saturated fat but high in protein that we can get? And also, I'm gonna add to it, because this is something, some areas, maybe not so much around here, but we have what are known as food deserts in many urban areas. So how are we able to get to these foods, and what about cost?
Okay, let's start with the food deserts. I mean, I think that's not something that we as individuals can all solve for ourselves. I mean, if we have the means, we can travel outside of where we live and really find those foods. But I think that concept of food desert becomes something that all of us have to work together on, and we have to get our legislators, those people that we elected to represent us, to get engaged, because part of their process, as someone told me once, under those domes in every state, is dividing up the resources and how they go to communities. So the food desert's not something we can do on our own. The second one, what do we do? What foods can we eat? I mean, I didn't tell you you couldn't eat everything, and sometimes it's important how much of it you eat. I think I still believe in moderation, but I think moderation becomes important. But also, fresh vegetables without added meat products. That includes, I'm at the point where that includes turkey sometimes too, in terms of adding it to all of our vegetables. So vegetables without meat, in today's world, we call it Googling. You can go on the internet. There are enough people out there that are doing healthy food that I think you can find things that you can cook. You can find recipes for greens that don't have meat that taste good. I believe it. And if you're gonna eat meat, fish is good. Plant-based proteins. I think the one thing that you have to be kind of careful about are things like palm oil, coconut oil, because those have high saturated fats, but other olive oil, other things are good for you. So it's really about finding the things that are good. Now, sometimes when you first start dealing with those things that are good, they don't taste as good as the things that are bad for you. I was having a conversation with somebody about potato chips, and that they just can't give up potato chips. Well, there are other snacks that are equally as easy to deal with, but they're healthier. And so when you sit, and I'm going to say one more thing. Okay, so you say, I'm going to eat salad. Well, that's where the type of salad dressing you use come into play. Because if that salad dressing, I'm going to be honest, if that salad dressing tastes too good, it's probably got some stuff in it that you don't need. And you know, it takes a while to get used to that vinaigrette. But give yourself some time, because that's what's good for you.
I'm not eating vinaigrette, forget it. I'm not doing that, but I will tell you, if you're gonna have your salad, toss it in there, get a tablespoon and toss it. Don't just put it on the top.
Right.
Mix it up in there, all right? So you don't have to worry about that vinaigrette stuff, because I'm not gonna do it. All right, now, a question for you also, Dr. Sanders, if you be brief on this one. Because this is combining a couple of questions. Should our primary care physicians be aware enough to make this diagnosis, or do we have to go see somebody like Dr. Aurora?
Well, I think it's both and, not either or. I think your primary care physician has to organize your symptoms and organize some thought process, and then refer you to the cardiologist for a question, and then they need to work together. So it's both and, not either or. And I think the primary care physician has to be knowledgeable, and I think that's where the concept of increasing awareness. But also in today's world, most of you are pretty much able to tell what you're going on, and I know that somebody's done looked on the computer for you if you haven't done it yourself, and you've got a good idea, so share that with your primary care physician.
All right. Dr. Aurora, as I've oftentimes had to say to some of my patients, because someone said to me, Dr. Google does not equal my 4 years of medical school. So Dr. Sanders is right. But what can you tell us about what causes tachycardia, and particularly when a person is a type 1 diabetic, do they have to be more concerned about something going on? And would you recommend a stress test, and if so, when?
Okay, there are multiple questions in there. So what causes tachycardia? It's the amyloid deposition in the nervous system of the heart. So that messes it up, and that nervous system is responsible for the regular beating of the heart. So the top chamber beats, then the bottom chamber. When the amyloid protein gets deposited in those nerves, it messes it up. So the top chamber can sometimes get crazy and start to beat very fast. At other times, the conduction from the top chamber to the bottom chamber can slow down, and you can feel your heart is not beating at all, right? So that's called bradycardia. So those signs and symptoms of fast and slow and irregular, crazy, or symptoms when you're lying on your left side, those are all related to the nervous system deposition in the heart. Okay, so that was first question.
Tell me about the stress test.
Stress test. So a stress test is done to find out if you have blockages in the arteries of the heart. So heart is a muscle, and it has 3 main arteries which run over the heart to supply that muscle. Okay? So heart attack is caused by a blockage in that artery. And the stress test is used to diagnose if there's a blockage in the artery of the heart. So if you have symptoms like chest pain when you are exerting, shoulder pain, sometimes back pain, in patients who have diabetes, they may not have chest pain. They just may have non-specific symptoms like shortness of breath, sweating, nausea. So those symptoms, if you have those, and if you let me know, or any other, or Dr. Sanders, we would say, okay, let's see, maybe there's some blockage in the artery of heart. So we will start with the stress test, which is, stress tests are a few different types. One is we can make you exercise on a treadmill and take pictures of the heart. If you are unable to do that, we can do a chemical stress test and give you a medicine which mimics as if you have exercised, and then take pictures of your heart.
Don't worry, we're going to call you or Ms. Brown as you recommended we call earlier. No problem. Ms. Childs, all the times you went into the hospital with this chest pain, did you think that you were having a heart attack, and did people tell you that you were having a heart attack?
Well, no, he didn't tell me I was having a heart attack, but he did do like EKGs, and my cardiac enzymes would never be high. But my heart would still be racing.
Okay. So, Dr. Sanders, are there different symptoms for heart attacks in men versus women?
Often women may not have any symptoms at all. And sometimes they'll be slightly short of breath. Men can have some of those same things, it just depends. But I think anytime, the way I think about it is this, is that the heart is a muscle. If you start to walk up a hill, or you start to exert yourself, and you either get short of breath, you just don't feel right, you feel a little dizzy, those are all, to me, indications that that heart muscle isn't pumping, maybe because it's not getting enough blood, all right? Maybe because it's not getting enough blood. But interestingly enough, I think as we've heard, all of these symptoms relate to heart disease, but don't necessarily tell you which heart disease it is. So I think rather than trying to figure out sometimes for me, as a patient, what the disease is, it's better to know the symptoms. You said something that I have to repeat. Look, here's the thing. When do I go to the doctor? If something keeps happening, and it keeps happening consistently and predictably, and it's getting worse, that's the time to go to the physician.
All right, but Dr. Aurora, we know that certain people, based upon sex, race, and ethnicity, can show up in an emergency room with the exact same symptoms, and the diagnosis will not be the same. A white male can go into the emergency room complaining of chest pain, and the whole world's going to stop and work out that this person has a heart attack. An African-American female can go into the emergency room, and they say, nerves, she's anxious. There's a lot of anxiety going on. We've seen that a lot of times, or may say it's esophageal spasm or something else that's going on. So, tell me, I'll ask you the same question. Do we sometimes see different presentations, or is it because of the bias? I think you said it best. Sometimes our eyes are not seeing what our brain is talking about. Which is it?
The symptoms can vary from person to person as well, not just men and women, but in between individuals as well. My angina may not look like your angina. So being your advocate is the most important thing we need to learn from today's meeting, that we have to be persistent about what we are feeling. Like if you feel it, you say it. I think that I like that one. I'm going to take it and tell all my patients. But it can be variable. But if we are working any complaint in a way we should, so if you come to ER, if you're getting an EKG done, if we are getting lab tests done, which is troponin and other enzymes, then we should be able to diagnose what's going on.
Yes, Dr. Sanders.
I can't let that one go.
I gave it to you first.
No. I want to go back. You presented it a different way. And that is that people who look differently, white men, white women, black men, can go to the doctor with the same symptoms. And based on how I, as the physician, interprets that, or what my biases are, what I bring to the table as to what I think about that person, can get you in trouble. So that's why I said in the beginning, If your doctor doesn't listen to you, then you need to get up and find another one. Now, I'm going to share a very personal story. When I first started practicing medicine, I found it very difficult to care for people my age because I didn't want them to be sick, because I didn't want to be sick. But I had to learn how to get beyond that. And what I realized is I brought that bias to the table. So it helped me understand that study that you just referenced much better. And I think we ought to get a lot of physicians reading that study.
Well, it's oftentimes said that a physician should have gray hair because it gives them wisdom beyond the years that they may actually have. Now, I know there were a couple other questions which we're going to have.
I get that question asked a lot.
I would never say that to a lady. Forget it. But there are a couple other questions I know we had, particularly related to diabetes and also relationship to kidneys, but we're going to have to end things up. So please, for those two questions, ask us at the end of this. I want each of you to think about it. I'll give you 1 minute to give me a quick 30-second comment that you want us all to take home with. The 30-second one. I want to remind everyone, please fill out your post-survey questions. And don't put on there something bad because that Tucson guy didn't answer my question. Don't put that down there. You just fussed at me about that. I apologize. But we will be here, so please ask if there were questions. And there was also a question about, can we take this program to other communities? And the answer to that is yes. The answer to that is yes, it can go to other communities and also back here again next Saturday. Here, but we will be available. And it's going to be online also, so if you can go take a look and tell your friends who weren't able to be here. But yes, that's a great point, and we'll try to see if we can't get this to other communities. All right, I'm going to start off with you, Alicia. So what is the take-home point you want us to have?
If you don't remember anything else, remember that you really need to get detailed medical history information from 3 generations. Find out what age things started in people. Find out what was the cause, if they know the cause. And make sure you share this information with other family members because it does matter.
So I want to say that you are in charge of your own health. Everyone, you can take care of your own health. So start from today, take care of what you eat, what you do, so exercise, take control of your symptoms, your medications, your doctors, and your family. Thank you.
Ms. Winnie.
I would say, let's talk to each other and find out what's going on with each other, and do not be afraid of a bad diagnosis, because that diagnosis could be saving your life. I have many friends that I tell about their amyloidosis when they tell me they have heart issues, and I say, have you ever been checked for amyloidosis? And they go like, no. Get checked. It's worth your time and your effort. Your health means more than that. And if you go to a doctor and he is treating you and you are not getting better, let that doctor know or find another doctor. Because I had to report back to my doctor when I got the diagnosis. And at that time, amyloidosis was not even in their database. They had to get it added and pull it up to read about what it is. So if you're not getting any better, don't stop there. Keep going.
Yeah, even though Dr. Sanders was telling you about to watch out eating all those cows and beef and all that, the stuff coming that Mr. Otis is growing, that's good for us. That's safe stuff. So go.
Thank you for that. I would just reiterate what I said a little earlier about listen to your body. You know your body. You know what you have been capable of doing in the past, and when you have sudden changes and those sudden changes stay persistent, it's time to go see a doctor. Right. And if you get that diagnosis, do not be afraid to make lifestyle changes. Embrace it, because we have to make changes. And so, you know, I just want to encourage everyone to talk to your family members. And again, listen to your body.
Dr. Sanders.
Pay attention to what you eat. because in many ways what you eat contributes to what you become.
Let's give a hand to the panel, please. Again, we're going to have closing remarks from Dr. Hammond, but I want to remind you, don't get mad at me, but he is the last thing between lunch and you. So I just want you to know that. Dr. Hammond.
Let's give Dr. Tuxton a hand. Yeah. Yeah, and it's already after 12:30, so. Okay, can we give our guest a big hand? Oh my God. This seminar has been so beneficial to me because before today, I never heard the word amyloidosis. I mean, in a few days, I'll be 69 years old, and I never heard the word amyloidosis. Thank you so much to our guest, to Hill Collaborative and AstraZeneca. Let's give them a hand. Oh, God. And this is just part one. This is just part one. Next week, same place, same time. We'll be right back here for part two of this very necessary ministry. I am so glad that we had some of our elected officials here so that they could see about the food deserts and things like that. That's a way they can help us because look at Pratt City. We got to go to Adamsville to buy a loaf of bread. Yes. Yes. So I'm glad our officials were here. So next Saturday, for those of you who come back for part two, now I hope everybody signed in. If you didn't sign in, please sign in because next Saturday, if you come back next Saturday for part two, Antioch is going to give you a little special gift for coming back. Because we want you to have part two of this necessary ministry. Okay, final thing on my notes, and that is lunch is ready. Lunch is ready. We want you to go out of this door, go outside of the building and upstairs to the J.R. Walker building. They have the plates right there at the door. They told me to tell you get one plate. And not one for Uncle Buck. If Uncle Buck ain't here, Uncle Buck don't eat. Okay? And you can have a seat. Now, for those of you, we know we have some senior saints. They can't get up the stairs, and those who are, handicapped, we will serve some downstairs. I've already texted Brother Brandon about how many will be downstairs. So we'll serve upstairs and downstairs. Thank you all. So was this worth your morning? And we also streamed this, and we've had people make comments on the stream. This is necessary information. I wish we had had this 40 years ago. So thank you all so much, and we're going to prepare to go and have lunch. All right, let's stand. Thank you all so much. Howard and Gabrielle, thank you all so much. Okay. We're going to have benediction and the blessing of the food. So glad my wife made it out here today. Amen. I'm happy for that because she's been sick all week, and she was a big girl. She came out here by herself. Amen. So glad to have you, baby. Amen. Father, thank you. Thank you, Lord. Thank you for all of the information. Thank you for the testimonies. Thank you, Lord, for everything our eyes have seen and our ears have heard. Thank you, God, for the extension of life that's going to happen to somebody because they were here today. Thank you for the better quality of life that we'll have for applying these things that we've seen and heard. Now, Lord, we pray you bless the food that has been prepared for the nourishment of our bodies. And, oh, God, we pray that you keep us this coming week and bring us back here next Saturday so that we can hear the next part of this necessary ministry. Dismiss us from this place, but never from your care. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, out this side door right here, up the stairs.